Liberals. 10 years ago, the Conservatives promised to clean up the Senate. Today, after they themselves having appointed 59 senators, they're defending the status quo and the corruption in the Senate. They said that they came here to change Ottawa, but what we see now is that Ottawa that has changed them. Luckily, Mr. Speaker, optimism is in the air. The force of change is moving. And on October 19th, the public will finally be able to vote for a party that will defend its interests no matter what. And that party is the NDP.
The honourable member for Mississauga-Arundel.
Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Liberal Party wants to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. But Canadians know this simple truth. He is, wait for it, he is not ready for the job. There are so many examples of this to point to. He attributed Putin's aggression to a hockey game. He said that the country he most admires in the world is China. And he introduced a wide scattershot 32-point plan that was clearly written on the back of a napkin somewhere. Mr. Speaker, Canada is the best country in the world. It is a country where we stand up for our beliefs, whether it be home or abroad. It is a country where we want every family to succeed and spend on their priorities by cutting taxes and creating jobs. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Liberal Party is simply not ready.
All questions. Questions orales. The honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, General Lawson stated in an interview that the issue of sexual harassment in the armed forces is due in part, and I quote, to biology. This obviously is absolutely unacceptable. What we want to know is what the Prime Minister will do to change this culture within the Canadian Armed Forces when it comes to sexual harassment. Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Lawson's comments were inappropriate and unacceptable. They were offensive, Mr. Speaker. Any sexual misconduct and harassment is unacceptable in any institution. The General immediately apologized for his comments. But, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Armed Forces and General Whitecross will be implementing all recommendations from the Deschamps report. Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Well, what he just said will not change the culture that is pervasive in the armed forces. The question is what he will do.
Are, of course, as wrong as they are a representation of everything that's pervasive in the military. So will the Prime Minister himself commit to implementing Justice Deschamps' recommendations in order to put an end to this toxic culture within our military with regard to sexual assault and sexual misconduct? That culture is wrong. It has to be changed from the top. Will the Prime Minister act?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, I found the General's comments offensive, inappropriate, completely unacceptable. Sexual misconduct, sexual harassment are unacceptable in any institution, and I think we are all very clear on that. There is no excuse for it, Mr. Speaker. The General did immediately apologize for his comments, but I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that the men and women in the military, they commissioned the report on this particular issue, gave a series of recommendations. The Armed Forces, General Whitecross, are in process of implementing those things immediately, and I do not think we should do anything that should slur all of the men and women in uniform.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister stated that his government, and I quote, encouraged the RCMP to destroy documents, even though he knew that this was breaking the law. The Ontario Provincial Police are currently investigating this issue. Did the Prime Minister contact the police in order to tell them about his own involvement in this illegal activity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, This government committed to all Canadians to abolish the long gun registry. And this Parliament passed legislation to that effect. The RCMP has acted under the law, and obviously the government also acts under the law. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Does the Prime Minister still believe that all senators meet the residency requirements to sit in the Senate? And if so, would he be kind enough to tell us where Senator Carolyn Stewart Olsen lives?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, after a complete audit, the Leader of the NDP gets up and makes an accusation against someone who's accused of absolutely nothing. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is the Senate has done an audit and the Senate is responding to its recommendations. What hasn't been responded to is the NDP taking public money and putting it into their own party organization. That is what was done in the sponsorship scandal. They've done that at a level of 3 times all of the accusations against senators combined. It is totally unacceptable, and I look forward to Canadians passing the check.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Carolyn Stewart Olsen, the Senator for Ottawa-Moncton.
Does the Prime Minister agree with his Conservative Senator, Jean-Luc Dagenet, who seems to think that his office has the right to claim taxpayer money for kilometers that they never traveled? The Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, an audit was done. They will be acting according to the audit, and the NDP is simply inventing accusations against certain individuals. The reality is that we have a member here who owes $400,000 in taxpayers' monies, and this is absolutely unacceptable. And the public will have an opportunity to state their preferences.
Mr. Speaker, it's 2015. Sexual harassment in our military is unacceptable.
Order. The Honourable Member for Papineau has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, it's 2015, and sexual harassment in our military is unacceptable. Someone in a leadership role excusing it as biological wiring is unacceptable. An apology that says this was just an awkward characterization is unacceptable. The Prime Minister just said that he agrees. So why won't the Prime Minister immediately dismiss his Chief of Defence Staff?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, I'm glad to see the Leader of the Liberal Party has been briefed on the facts in terms of the year. In terms of the more serious issue, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, obviously the comments made here are offensive, they are inappropriate, they are inexplicable. Mr. Speaker, the General did immediately apologize. But as we've said repeatedly, sexual misconduct is unacceptable in any institution, government or non-governmental. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Armed Forces takes this issue very seriously. They commissioned a report, a series of comprehensive recommendations, and they are acting on them.
Member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, sexual harassment has no place here. Anyone in a position of leadership must set an example. The Chief of Defence Staff of the Canadian Armed Forces made unacceptable comments on this issue, and his apologies are inadequate. Once again, It's no joke, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell us why he has not immediately called for the resignation of the Chief of Defence Staff? Right Honourable the Prime Minister. The General immediately apologized, and as I said, his comments were absolutely inappropriate and offensive and unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. The Canadian Armed Forces are acting on the recommendations on sexual harassment within the military, and they have a comprehensive program to do that. The Chief of Defence Staff has already announced his retirement, and his successor has already been appointed, and that will be happening soon. Mr. Speaker, for 10 years, the Prime Minister has repeatedly attacked the Supreme Court. It has changed the appointment process for judges and has turned it into a partisan and closed process. The Liberal Party has a plan for true change. It is going to bring back an appointment process for the Supreme Court that is inclusive, representative, and transparent. This is a process that will guarantee that judges are bilingual. Why does the Prime Minister refuse to acknowledge the importance of having judges who understand both official languages? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Well, I've been pleased to see the 32 recommendations.
Number one policies, Mr. Speaker, none of which, of course, correspond to anything he or his party has ever done in the past on this or any other issue. Mr. Speaker, our institutions are bilingual. The Parliament of Canada is bilingual. The Supreme Court of Canada is bilingual. Other institutions, we do not require every single member of them to be bilingual.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Nigel Wright told the RCMP that he briefed the Prime Minister on the media lines for the Duffy deal. Wright said in an email that he had, quote, the good to go from the PM, unquote. So why did the Prime Minister claim that he had never given Wright any instructions regarding the Duffy scandal? Good to go seems like a pretty clear instruction.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, as the Leader of the NDP knows very well, he is quoting from an RCMP report that thoroughly examined this matter, was given access to all documents, and was very clear that I knew nothing of this particular matter. Unlike him, who signed all of the papers that took the money inappropriately and fraudulently out of the House of Commons, for which he will have to answer.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the question, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor.
The question, Mr. Speaker, is just that. Is the Prime Minister good to go? Is he good to go to swear to these statements under oath on a witness stand? If the Prime Minister is called to testify in the Mike Duffy trial, will he appear or will he hide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, as those who have investigated this have said that I am neither a participant nor a witness to any of these events, there is absolutely no reason why I would be before the court, Mr. Speaker, but I would invite him to have the RCMP look at his files on the $400,000 he personally took and the $3 million his party took out of the House of Commons.
Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, now that we've heard the Prime Minister about the Liberal Conservative kangaroo court, why don't we look at what real courts have had to say about the Conservative record? 2006, convicted in court of cheating in the In-N-Out scandal. 2008, convicted of cheating in the Dean Del Mastro affair. 2011, convicted in court for cheating in the robocall scandal. The Prime Minister's team has been convicted of cheating in every single election he has won. What safeguards has he put in place to try to ensure that his team doesn't cheat this time around?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, here is a party that itself has been found guilty of inappropriate robocalls, has been forced to return union funds that they illegally raised and knowingly did so, Mr. Speaker. And of course, Mr. Speaker, still $2.7 million taken out of the House of Commons by the NDP, not for any parliamentary purpose, for the use of its own party offices across the country. This is exactly the kind of thing that happened in the sponsorship scandal, and the NDP will be held accountable for it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is using Bill C-51 to attack our rights and freedoms while offering no proof that this law will actually protect Canadians. If the Prime Minister is so confident of the legality of Bill C-51, why doesn't he simply refer it to the Supreme Court prior to royal assent?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-51 gives our law enforcement and security agencies all of the powers that are typically had across major Western governments to deal with the very real security threats. Things like sharing information between departments, having the ability to use peace bonds in case of imminent threat, and I could go through those, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the NDP, Mr. Speaker, is always against these things, always against this kind of thing, votes against every single piece of security legislation ever put forward because of their extreme and ideological positions. And what would you expect? What do you expect from a leader who thinks Osama bin Laden is still alive and there's no such thing as a terrorist attack in Canada?
L'honorable chef de la Order! 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 The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
400,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs have been lost while this Prime Minister did absolutely nothing. 60% of the jobs created over the past 6 years are precarious, part-time, or contract work. In Ontario, that number is a whopping 83%. Is that the Prime Minister's plan for middle-class families to support themselves with part-time jobs?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I say it again, it's very clear in Statistics Canada's report, 1.2 million net new jobs since the end of the recession, overwhelmingly full-time, high-paying in the private sector, the best record in the G7 by a considerable stretch, Mr. Speaker. But we shouldn't expect the leader of the NDP to know his facts, because yesterday, of course, he was out there saying businesses need to pay higher taxes. Then asked, what is the tax rate exactly? Well, he didn't know and stated it 3 points lower than it actually is. Typical NDP, they don't know what the taxes are, they just know everybody's taxes have to be higher.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Heading into a previous election, the Prime Minister handed over a $5 million cheque at Electromotive Diesel in London, Ontario. Only problem is the plant shut down just a while later and the jobs were shipped to the U.S. Heading into this election, the Prime Minister included footage of the Chevy Camaro assembly line in Oshawa. Only problem is that it was shut down and the jobs have been shipped to the U.S. So will the Prime Minister admit that his plan isn't working, or at the very least, will he please stop visiting assembly lines?
Hear, hear! The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Or at least the leader of the Liberal Party knows when to stop getting up. Mr. Speaker, the government's job creation record in a period of global economic uncertainty is not paralleled among major industrial countries. We've done that with a balanced budget and with lower taxes for Canadian businesses and Canadian workers and Canadian families. And every sector, the automotive sector, the exporters and manufacturers, are strongly supportive of the government's economic action plan, and nothing is going to convince those businesses or Canadian workers to buy the snake oil that somehow high taxes and big deficits are going to bring about greater prosperity. People can see what NDP policies have done in other countries. They're not going to have them here.
Order. We still have a lot of names left to get through. We're losing valuable time. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor.
Speaker, that's the kind of arrogance that could mean that this is the Prime Minister's last question period, so I hope he doesn't mind. We've got a couple more. The Prime Minister's plan is not working. The Prime Minister has failed. That's why Canadians want change. As families struggle to make ends meet, the Prime Minister is telling seniors they'll have to wait an extra 2 years to retire, raising the retirement age to 67. The Prime Minister forgot to mention that in the last election campaign. Can he please tell Canadians today what he's hiding up his sleeve for the next time around?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I remind the Leader of the NDP it will be Canadians, not him, who decides the result of the next election. Mr. Speaker, Canadians understand we are living in a global economy that is very troubled. They also understand, Mr. Speaker, as they look around the world, that there is absolutely no better place to be than this country, Canada. We have, Mr. Speaker, we have a balanced budget. We have lower taxes for Canadian families, businesses and workers. We have more money that's going into the pockets of our senior citizens and families, Mr. Speaker, and I don't believe anyone's going to blow that by buying the high-tax snake oil of the NDP.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Canadians have already decided and they want change, Mr. Speaker. Did the Prime Minister ask Pope Francis to apologize on behalf of the Catholic Church for its involvement in the horrors of residential schools?
Did the Prime Minister ask Pope Francis to apologize for the role the Catholic Church played in the horrors of residential schools? He met the Pope. Did he ask the Pope for apologies, yes or no?
Yes or no?
This government has apologized for that. We've brought to the attention of the Pope and the Catholic Church the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It will be up to the Catholic Church to decide how to respond to the recommendations that are pertinent to them. But, Mr. Speaker, the kind of change Canadians are seeking is change that means more prosperity, lower taxes, and greater trade. That's the kind of change they're looking for. They're not looking for the high-tax, protectionist, anti-prosperity agenda of the NDP.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Instead of asking Canadians to give up their freedoms, the Prime Minister ought to be showing a little respect for the people who fought for our freedoms, our veterans. The Prime Minister has closed veteran service centres, ignored a rash of military suicides, and let his minister literally berate those who served our country. Will the Prime Minister make a show of good faith and commit to reopening those 9 veterans' offices?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, Canadians' veterans' services under this government are the best in the world. We've augmented those services across all fronts, Mr. Speaker, and provided more points of service to Canadian veterans than ever before. Mr. Speaker, the men and women who serve in uniform and who have served in uniform, they can witness the kind of slur made earlier on them by the Leader of the NDP. They know who is on their side, and it is this party.
The Honourable Member for
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister confirmed yesterday it was on his encouragement that the RCMP was instructed to violate the law and destroy government documents. If anyone needed any more proof that Ottawa is broken, they need look no further than a Prime Minister who puts direct pressure on the National Police Force to break the law. Has this Prime Minister become so out of touch that he thinks he can ask the RCMP to break the law and then write himself a nice little bill to absolve himself of responsibility? Does this Prime Minister really believe he is above the law?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to confirm for my honourable colleague that our government committed to ending the costly and ineffective long gun registry, and that's what we did, Mr. Speaker. But one thing is clear, the Liberals would like to get it back. And they want to treat as second-class citizens all fishers and hunters in this country. But we are going to continue to stand up and strengthen public safety laws without harming those who are involved in hunting.
Mr. Speaker, after 10 years, the Conservatives' complete neglect of the manufacturing sector has had a devastating toll. In Toronto, a quarter of its manufacturing jobs have simply vanished. Kitchener, Waterloo, Quebec City, Sherbrooke, each have lost a third of their jobs, and in Windsor is nearly 40%. The Conservatives' only response is to spend millions on partisan ads while posting record trade deficits. Instead of trying to deceive Canadians with their own money, when are they going to produce a real manufacturing strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Well, we have, Mr. Speaker, as my colleague may well know, in the Stats Canada numbers on jobs in the month of May, it showed that not only that 60,000 new jobs are created that month, but that 22,000 new jobs are created in the manufacturing sector, about which she asks. She asks equally for a plan and for some action by our government on manufacturing. We have done so and put forward effective measures in our government's budget, from the capital cost allowance to the automotive supplier fund, the automotive innovation fund, to the tech demo program. We are supporting manufacturers, which is why the Canadian Association of Manufacturers and Exporters endorsed our budget and attacked the Liberal leader for his saying that Canada needs to move away from manufacturing. We support our manufacturers, we deliver for them, and we will never do what the Liberal leader does.
The Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
Mr. Speaker, the more this government announces, the less it seems to happen. And the MP for Calgary Centre found this out the hard way, because she's just found out what the rest of the country's known for a couple of years now. There is no infrastructure money flowing to major cities in this country. We have now lost 2 full construction seasons. Lots of promises, lots of billboards, lots of ads, but the funds, as the Conservative MP said herself, are sitting there unused. She tried to blame the Mayor of Calgary for this, and he told her to go hire a fact checker. Since the Conservative government is more interested in slamming the Mayor of Calgary than helping that city, let me ask the question. Is the government going to fund the Green Line? Is this government going to deliver transit and jobs to Calgary, or are they going to tell...
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government's investment in provincial and municipal infrastructure are unprecedented. Since 2006, we have invested 6 times more on average than other Liberal years of darkness and inaction in infrastructure. Talk about Ontario. We have invested in Scarborough Subway, Shepherd Light, Rail, Transit, the Union Station revitalization, the Kitchener-Waterloo Rapid Transit, and the list is very long. 2 times a year, we're transferring the money for the gas tax fund to provinces and municipalities. That's thing done, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Mr. Speaker, more than 4 decades after the waterways around Grassy Narrows were contaminated, a new report has revealed that the mercury levels in parts of the English Wabigon River are increasing. Wow. The mercury is an obvious risk to the health of the Grassy Narrows First Nation. But despite this, there hasn't been any adequate study of the impact of these levels on the people's health. A new report calls for a comprehensive study to be concluded. Will this government support this study, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
The health and well-being of First Nation is a priority for our government, and we continue to work with the Mercury Disability Board and the province of Ontario to support their work in addressing the issue of mercury contamination. Mr. Speaker, we have been working in partnership with the First Nation and the province of Ontario for a number of years, and that good cooperation and work will continue.
Good. The honourable member for Churchill.
Mr. Speaker, yet no answer for this question for the people of Grassy Narrows First Nation. Let's move on to the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. This Friday, the RCMP is expected to publish a report talking about this ongoing tragedy. Indigenous people have called for the full analysis and the full details of what numbers are out there, so that all systemic factors can be addressed and analyzed. This evidence should come before an inquiry, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has also recommended. So the question is, when will this government take seriously the issue, the national epidemic that is missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada?
Mr. Speaker, these are terrible crimes against innocent people, and the RCMP had said in its own study that the vast majority of these cases are addressed and solved through police investigations. Mr. Speaker, we don't need another study. We've already had over 40 studies that have been done. We need to move forward with the action plan that is going to make and improve the lives for women and children living on reserve. Thank you.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, in the dying days of the 2011 election, Elections Canada warned Canadians about a Conservative voter suppression scheme, but now they're sounding the alarm bells months before this election. They're telling people they need to act urgently to get the new voter ID requirements. So why is it so much harder to vote? Is it because the Conservative Party don't believe they can win a fair fight? The fact is, many Canadians, seniors, youth, First Nations will go to vote and be told, sorry, you're not allowed to vote this time. Why is this corrupt government relying on voter suppression tactics in order to try and cling to power?
The honourable minister of Democratic Reform.
Mr. Speaker, this is yet another example of the loony left in the NDP, which doesn't even believe people should bring ID when they vote. The good news is 87% of Canadians agree that you should bring ID when you vote. And that is why we passed the Fair Elections Act. Canadians overwhelmingly agree with the Fair Elections Act, and we expect that they will agree with our overall common sense agenda in the coming elections.
The Honourable Member for Rougeant-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, for the Conservatives, not complying with election legislation has become a kind of reflex. Whether it's the in-and-out scandal, deceptive robocalls, Dean Del Maestro, Peter Panashaway, I could go on. But they had to add another layer with their Unfair Elections Act and make it even more difficult to vote. Today, 4 months before the vote, Elections Canada's sounding the alarm. For some people, it will even be more difficult to vote. Why are the Conservatives attacking this fundamental right? Why do they want to prevent people from voting? And what guarantees us that they won't cheat again? This is another example of the extreme left of the NDP. They think that people shouldn't even have to bring a piece of ID to vote. 87% of Canadians agree that people should have to present a piece of ID in order to vote in the elections. And, Mr. Speaker, that's the reason why we put that into our bill, our Fair Elections Act. Canadians agree with this approach, and that's the reason why they support us.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the NDP leader reaffirmed his support for higher CPP payroll taxes. And the Liberal leader has also committed to imposing the Ontario Liberals' dramatic payroll tax increases. Can the Minister of State for Finance please update the House on the government's position on these?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
I want to thank the hard-working member from Chatham-Kent Essex for that question. Our Conservative government understands that Canadians want low taxes and the freedom to make their own financial decisions. We are proud to be providing historic tax relief that is putting $6,600 back into the pockets of a typical two-earner family of four. We reject the Liberal leader's $1,000 tax hike on middle-class workers. Canadians know now is not the time for risky schemes and untested leadership.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan. The people of Laval are shocked by Canada Post's decision to put an end to home delivery. Despite their profits, Canada Post is stubbornly insisting on abolishing an essential service for our seniors and SMBs. Today we've learned that some neighborhoods will be exempted, others not. Canada Post is floundering around, Mr. Speaker. It's another example of the Conservatives' poor management. Will the minister finally do the only reasonable thing and restore home delivery service? Honourable Minister of Transport.
Let's get to the facts of this matter. Canada Post is losing a significant amount of money. As a result, they are converting to community mailboxes, which is $178 per address cheaper. Mr. Speaker, this is the way in which they're going to be self-sufficient in the future. Let's contrast that with the opposition wants to do, which is to reinstate some, all, part, I don't know, of door-to-door service, which will cost upwards of $500 million. Mr. Speaker, this is not the way to manage finances. Canadians know exactly who can manage the finances in this place, and it's this government.
The honourable member for London Fairfax.
Post made almost $200 million in profits last year. $200 million. But it's still going ahead with the plan to end door-to-door service for over 5 million Canadians. That is, unless you live in a certain neighborhood. Today we found out that Canada Post is allowing some neighborhoods special concessions. Why won't the minister admit that Canada Post's plan is flawed in all areas, and tell them to go back to the drawing board to restore home delivery?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I think the opposition to admit that they are flawed in anything to do with economics, because what they don't realize is this. There is no profit at Canada Post. They have a $1.4 billion pension payment that had to be made in 2014. That was forgiven because we're trying to get Canada Post back on its right footing. Mr. Speaker, the members of the opposition should stop talking for the members of Cup W, and they should start speaking on behalf of Canadians who want to make sure their tax dollars go to
the honourable member for Victoria.
CBC's uncovered yet another Conservative appointee wasting tax dollars. This time it's at the Canadian Mint. He okayed post-conference vacations for employees and their spouses. Remember back, Mr. Speaker, when Conservatives attacked Liberals for David Dingwall being, and I quote, entitled to his entitlements when he was at the Mint. Now the Conservatives appointee is jetting off on taxpayer-funded vacations, putting even Mr. Dingwall to shame. What happened to them? When exactly did they become just like the corrupt Liberals they replaced?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Abuse of taxpayers' dollars is unacceptable and will not be tolerated by our government. As soon as I was made aware of the expenses, I instructed the Mint to adhere to appropriate management and oversight of travel and hospitality expenses by staff and board members, consistent with Treasury Board guidelines. While the Mint manages its own expenses like other Crown corporations, it has a responsibility to ensure public funds are managed properly and in the best interests of taxpayers.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Senior officials at the Royal Canadian Mint, those who make our money, are also apparently paying for luxury travel for their staff, themselves, and their spouses. A 5-star resort in Mexico, trips to Thailand, Australia, Vienna. Nothing is too good for the royal class. All of this, more than $160,000 in public funds to take it easy, and the nice warm sand. Can the Minister of Finance responsible for the Canadian Mint explain to us how it's possible that this might have happened? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, as I have said, no abusive use of taxpayers' money will be tolerated by our government. As soon as I learned of the existence of these dubious expenses, I gave the Mint the direction to have adequate oversight of expenses. The Mint must, like all other Crown corporations, ensure that public funds are always managed in the best interest of the taxpayer.
The honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Mr. Speaker, Michael Chan has been a good friend of mine for 15 years, and I know he is a loyal, patriotic Canadian. 4 years ago, CSIS told him he was no longer under investigation, and the Premier of Ontario has said the charges against him were baseless. Do Conservatives believe it's wrong to maintain strong ties with one's country of origin? Yesterday's comments by the Attorney General on operational matters were beneath the dignity of his office. Will he stand and apologize in this House?
Say sorry. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, it's quite simple. This is something that comes under the Ontario government. I have nothing further to say.
Mr. Speaker, the regulations governing the installation of cell towers require companies to consult local municipalities beforehand, but there's a glaring loophole. If the antenna is to be installed on an existing structure, like a hydro pole or telephone pole, there's no obligation to consult. Why not? Whether it's on a new or existing structure, residents, like those on Taywood Avenue in my riding, have the same concerns about an antenna's proximity to their home, especially if children are involved. Will the minister close this loophole as soon as possible?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Industry.
The regulations, when applied, actually don't allow for that loophole. I'm happy to talk to the member and find out exactly what's happening in his district as he describes it. But the regulations that we put in place, Mr. Speaker, were proposed by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And, of course, the vastness of this country and the geographic dynamics and the demand for all Canadians to have access to high-speed cellular connectivity is critically important for our government. But we want to do so in a way that coincides with the demand for communities to build their communities with an aesthetic that makes sense. So I'm happy to look into the matter with the member.
Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, 11 years ago, an NDP motion passed by Parliament asked for the regulation of the use of trans fats. Since then, not only have the Conservatives not followed Health Canada's recommendations that could save $9 billion to the health system, even worse, they decided to drop the regulations that were planned for 2010. For their part, the United States announced that they would abolish the use of trans fats. Why does the minister refuse to regulate the use of trans fat that are so harmful to our health? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we've been really focused on making sure Canadians have the information they need to make healthy choices. And we were the first country in the world to require mandatory labeling to decrease trans fat levels in food. And this is working. We're working with industry. The approach has actually decreased intake by 60% in the last 2 decades. But we're always willing to examine further action if it's going to benefit families.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it's not okay to put poison in our food just because it's properly labelled. Banning trans fats will save lives. Full stop, period. Yet 11 years after Parliament directed government to ban trans fat, we're still clogging our children's arteries with this toxic goop. Now, the United States has taken direct action and banned trans fats in all its forms. Will Canadians have to wait until the NDP forms the next government before we can protect consumers from this public health hazard?
The Honourable Prime Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we've taken important and significant action on this particular issue. And I would like to note that the decrease has been 60% in terms of the intake of trans fat. But also, I did notice that we will work with to see if further action will benefit families.
The Honourable Member for Langley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about saving lives. Impaired driving is a very serious crime that kills and injures thousands of Canadians every year. Can the hardworking Minister of Justice please update this House on what our Conservative government is doing to crack down on impaired driving? Right on.
The Honourable Minister.
He's been an outspoken advocate on this issue for many years. Mr. Speaker, in fact, impaired drivers pose a significant risk to Canadians. It is the #1 criminal cause of death in Canada. To make offenders more accountable for their crimes, we've introduced legislation to increase mandatory minimum penalties for many transportation offences, including impaired driving involving bodily harm or death. This would also increase efficiency for police officers to investigate impaired driving and for the prosecution to go forward with these serious cases. I encourage all members of this House to support this important bill that targets the scourge of impaired driving causing carnage on Canadian highways.
Mr. Speaker, the crisis with the presidential elections in Burundi is increasing. The Canadian government should speed up family reunification requests. In the end, we have deported a young woman who immediately had to flee Burundi because she was going to be arrested by the police and where she would have probably been tortured and raped. There are some 650 deportations planned. Will the minister speak to that issue? Mr. Speaker, we're following the situation closely in Burundi and the decisions in this regard, as is always the case with countries in conflict, will taken very carefully by the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, and we intend to continue to unify families and welcome people from Burundi here in Canada insofar as that's possible.
Mr. Speaker, a man with advanced cancer in my riding was nearly denied life-saving surgery, all because of a mistake at Citizenship and Immigration. He couldn't renew his health card without verification of his immigration status. But Immigration lost his application. Then they sent it to Alberta, mixed in with someone else's paperwork. Thankfully, after 2 months, he finally got the life-saving surgery he needed, but this is unacceptable. Will the minister investigate this horrendous bureaucratic blunder so it never happens again?
The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. Speaker, as the member well knows, we cannot speak about individual cases in this place. The Privacy Act forbids that. Decisions are taken by highly trained, highly professional public servants, but the member should do well in this near final question period of this Parliament not to politicize the cases of individuals, not to politicize the suffering of families, and to answer to this House, why is the NDP unable to support a bill yesterday at third reading that will protect women and girls from early and forced marriage, from polygamy, from honor-based violence? Why, Mr. Speaker, has the NDP done nothing to protect Canadians from abuse in our immigration system?
The honourable member for Mississauga East Cooksville.
Mr. Speaker, our government believes in low taxes for employers and employees. In fact, we've been lowering taxes on job creators since we took office. Can the Minister of Finance please update this House on our government's policy on taxes for job creators?
Good question.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the hard-working member from Mississauga-Cooksville for the important question. Today we saw the NDP leader's ideological position on taxes. When asked what the business tax rate is, first he made a mistake, and then he admitted he didn't know, but still believed they should be higher. This is the NDP position on taxes. Even when they are clueless about fiscal policy, they are convinced taxes need to be higher. I want to assure this House that our position on taxes is just as clear but starkly different. We understand taxes need to remain low to create jobs and growth.
The Honourable Member for Acadie Bathurst. Mr. Speaker, after several years before the courts, the snow crab license situation of New Brunswick fisherman Serenius Dugas has still not been resolved. Fisheries and Oceans would not allow him to transfer his fishing license. It would seem that the minister authorized the transfer of the permit based on false information and despite the fact that the transfer is still before the Court of Appeal. Why did the minister not respect the legal process? What was the rush to transfer this fishing permit? Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Before the courts for quite some time. The court has ruled and DFO acted upon that ruling.
Honourable Member for Haute-Gaspésie, la Métis Matane Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, On June 20th, I will be present at the gathering at Carleton in the Gaspé to show my support for the Recreation Tourism Development Project for the wharf that the community so wants. The goal is to create an infrastructure appropriate for commercial fishing, mariculture, pleasure boating, and tourism. It's a comprehensive project that will have major benefits for Carleton. In order to proceed, we now need the approval of Transport Canada, which owns the wharf. Will the Minister of Transport ensure that the Carleton Wharf Development Project, which is important for the Gaspé region, be rapidly processed? The Honourable Minister of Transport.
We have in place, Mr. Speaker, a Ports Asset Transfer Program, which just entered the sales phase on Monday of this week. I can assure the honourable member that le programme de cession exists.
The divestiture program exists for this reason. Discussions will continue with municipalities.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and I expect that the municipality, the province, will work with Transport Canada officials to make sure that we can transfer this into the hands of the local municipality.
That concludes question period for today. Pursuant to an order made on Tuesday, June 16, 2015, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on motion M575 under private members' business in the name of Mr. Lobb. Convoqué.
Call in the members.